Let's now talk about the structure and functionality of the client side of the MathServices App case study. This is going to have the client-related classes, including the proxies, that are going to send and receive requests to and from the MathServices microservices. Here's MathServices client. As you can see, it's a component, and it's got two proxies in it, one that talks to the GCD microservice, one that talks to the Primality microservice. And then it has some methods in here that do kind of the obvious things. If you call check primalities, it takes the list of prime candidates, calls through the proxy to the microservice that does prime checking. Likewise, for computing GCD, it takes a list of integers and calls through the proxy to the GCD microservice. These are all sort of obvious things, but we do it like this just to make it a little cleaner and more decoupled. The proxies are kind of interesting, and they're going to show off another set of features that we haven't really looked at before in our earlier examples for various reasons. So we're going to use an autowired REST template where, once again, if we so desired, we could have a connection pooling mechanism put in here, transparently interposing in there. And we'll see that this is just a little different from before when we look at the code. Here's what the Primality proxy looks like. And again, why do we use a proxy? We want to shield the rest of the code from these low-level HTTP programming details and make our software more reusable. First thing we do, we're going to use this as a little different from before. We're going to make a new URI component builder instance, and we're going to tell it to use HTTP, and we're going to tell it to use this port number and this host. And the reason that we're doing it this way is that, unlike before, where we had a bean that made a REST template that knew what server to talk to, because we have two microservices now, we don't want to hard code that into the bean that makes the REST template. So instead, we encode it here into the proxy. Not the only way to do things, not even the best way to do things, but it's the way we're doing it here just to make it clear. So that'll create a URL path portion, or URL host and port portion that looks like this, localhost, and that's the port. That's what we get from this. We're then going to use the path in order to add in the Primality list route name, and then we're going to add the appropriate query parameters, which basically take the prime candidates and turn them into a string and give them to the prime candidates string constant here so it can be encoded into the URL. That's what the list to string does. It gives back this stuff. And then the query params piece is going to add in these other pieces here. So we're going to have check primality, sorry, we're going to have question mark, prime candidates equal, and then that list of things. And then we finish building the URI string. And then we go ahead and make a GET request, passing in the REST template, that URI or URL, and the integer array as the return value we expect. Makes things really nice and clean. The GCD proxy is pretty much identical. It just uses a few different parameters, except it has a different port number and has different path name because it's going to a different place. OK, so that's just a quick walkthrough of the structure and functionality. Now we're going to take a look at the code. The next topic here is the client-related classes for all this, which are kind of interesting. So as you can imagine, the client is going to be having to be responsible for making calls both to the GCD microservice and the Primality microservice. So we're going to have to deal with that. And we're going to take a look at the code here in a second to show how it works. So we're now looking at the client piece here. As you can see, this has got some Java code. It's got the code that we just looked at, which is the MathServices client that auto-wires to the two proxies and calls through to them. And then we've got the proxies here. As you can see, this is pretty much what we did before when I walked through the other code. It essentially encodes the proxy to talk to the GCD microservice and encodes the proxy to talk to the Primality microservice, just using a slightly different scheme for creating this stuff. But otherwise, it's pretty much the same as before. So not much more to talk about here.